Claude-Alexandre de Bonneval, a name that once resonated through the aristocratic salons of Versailles and across the battlefields of Europe. It belonged to a man seemingly born under a lucky star, destined for glory. A hereditary count, he donned an officer's uniform at 15 and by 20 was serving directly under Louis XIV himself. His talent was undeniable, bold, decisive, with the sharp mind of a strategist. He fought for France in the War of the Spanish Succession, then entered the service of the Holy Roman Empire, where he found a patron in the legendary Prince Eugene of Savoy. For nearly 2 decades, Bonneval was one of Europe's most brilliant officers, his name mentioned alongside the era's greatest commanders. However, beneath this brilliant facade lay an insufferable character, arrogance, insubordination, a penchant for intrigue, and an absolute contempt for authority. He was a genius, but one who recognized no boundaries. This unruly nature could not long endure within a strict hierarchy. Conflicts followed one after another. His sharp tongue, his audacious behavior, his unwillingness to obey even Prince Eugene's orders, all created mortal enemies for him. The culmination was a trial initiated by Prince Eugene himself. The accusations were serious: disobedience, abuse of power, even embezzlement. Bonneval, realizing his European career was over and perhaps his life hanging by a thread, made a decision that shocked the entire continent. He fled, not just to another country, but into the arms of the sworn enemy of Christendom, the Ottoman Empire. In Constantinople in 1729, Claude-Alexandre de Bonneval converted to Islam, changed his name to Ahmed Pasha, and offered his services to Sultan Mahmud the Fur. This was not merely an act of desperation, but a cold calculation. European powers demanded his extradition, but the Sultan refused, granting him asylum and, more importantly, a position. Ahmed Pasha, or Humbertçı Ahmed Pasha, as he became known, was tasked with reforming the Ottoman artillery, the Humbertçı Corps. This unit, responsible for mortars and grenades, was in a deplorable state. Bonneval, with his European knowledge and military experience, proved to be the ideal candidate for the job. He didn't just train soldiers, he built new foundries, introduced modern technologies, and developed new tactics. Under his leadership, the Humbertçı transformed into a formidable force. Their effectiveness was proven in their first major campaign against Russia and Austria in 1737. The Ottoman army, utilizing Bonneval's modernized artillery, achieved a series of convincing victories that shocked Europe. Ahmed Pasha became a national hero in the Ottoman Empire, his influence grew, and his name struck terror in his former comrades. He was not merely a defector, he became the architect of military successes that altered the balance of power in the region. But make no mistake, behind this facade of hero and reformer lurked the same ruthless pragmatist. His conversion to Islam was not a spiritual awakening, but a cynical act of survival. His loyalty to the Sultan was not a true conviction, but the only path to the power and security denied to him in Europe. Claude-Alexandre de Bonneval was neither a martyr nor a saint. He was a predator who, cornered, shed his skin to continue the hunt. His story is not a romantic tale of rebirth, but a stark lesson in how far one can go to save oneself, even if it means betraying everything one seemingly believed in. He did not change himself, he merely found a new arena for his indomitable but destructive talent. But from where did this destructive force, this indomitable temper, ultimately lead Claude-Alexandre de Bonneval to the enemy's side? His story is not merely a sequence of events, but a deep dive into the psychology of a man whose exceptional abilities were inextricably linked to his own downfall. The environment in which he was shaped was an ideal breeding ground for an inordinate ego. Versailles, the court of Louis XIV, was a world where birth determined everything, where the aristocracy lived in the conviction of its own superiority, and where power and influence were not only privileges, but ends in themselves. Bonneval, a descendant of counts, was surrounded from childhood by an atmosphere where his position entitled him to more than others. At 15, he was already an officer, and by 20, he was serving directly under the Sun King. Such a rapid ascent likely reinforced his belief in his own exceptionalism. If ordinary rules and hierarchies easily bent to his youthful talent, why should he respect them later? A military career, full of dangers and the need for instantaneous decisions, only amplified this feeling. On the battlefield, where life hung by a thread and success depended on courage and quick wit, formal ranks and bureaucratic delays might have seemed like mere nuisances. His early victories and recognition from giants like Prince Eugene of Savoy constantly confirmed that his intuition, audacity, and unorthodox methods yielded results. But behind this facade of genius lay a growing inability to compromise, an intolerance for dissenting opinions, and, most dangerously, an absolute disdain for any authority that dared to contradict him. Perhaps he saw in it only envy or mediocrity, incapable of appreciating his greatness. Every conflict, every reprimand he deemed unjust, only hardened his conviction that he stood above these petty squabbles, above the rules themselves. The point of no return for Bonneval was not a specific trial or verdict, but a much deeper internal process. It was the gradual accumulation of the realization that the world he inhabited, with all its limitations and conventions, was too confining for his ambitions and character. He could not and would not submit, because he genuinely believed in his absolute right to freedom of action. His rebellion was not merely audacity, but a fundamental refusal to acknowledge anyone's authority but his own. And when this inability to submit clashed with the inflexibility of the European system, which demanded obedience, his escape to the Ottoman Empire became not an act of desperation, but a logical, albeit shocking, continuation of his indomitable nature. He did not change himself. He merely found a new arena where his destructive talent could, at last, unleash itself without restraint. The early 18th century in Europe was a time less of peace than of respite. Great powers, exhausted by decades of endless wars for the Spanish succession and the Great Northern War, had only temporarily laid down their arms to regroup. Borders were redrawn, thrones changed hands, but fundamental contradictions remained unresolved. The Habsburg monarchy, the Russian Empire, France, England, each player sought dominance, and in this complex chess game, the Ottoman Empire, traditionally the sick man of Europe to some and a formidable adversary to others, remained a key player. For most Europeans, the Ottoman Empire was not just a foreign land, but the embodiment of the exotic East and simultaneously a bastion of the infidel. The idea of a crusade against the Turks, though having lost its former fervor, still lingered, especially after recent wars where the Ottoman Empire had suffered several defeats, but still represented a significant force. Serving the Sultan, and especially converting to Islam, was considered an act of unthinkable apostasy and treason, a shameful mark that fell not only on the individual, but on their entire lineage. It was an absolute break with everything European society considered civilized and proper. However, behind this ideological facade lay a pragmatic reality. 18th century diplomacy was cynical and flexible. Alliances were formed and broken with astonishing ease, and national interests often outweighed religious convictions. For ambitious adventurers, for those who, for one reason or another, found themselves in disgrace at home, the East offered not only refuge, but also new opportunities. The Ottoman Empire, despite its size and wealth, recognized the need for modernization. Its army, once invincible, was beginning to lag behind European standards, especially in artillery and engineering. Sultans and their viziers understood that to maintain influence and protect their territories, they needed European knowledge and expertise. It was this political vacuum, this need for European technology and talent, that created a unique, fertile ground for figures like Claude-Alexandre de Bonneval. He was not the first nor the last European to seek fortune or salvation in Constantinople, but his case was unprecedented in its scale and impact. It was a time when the seemingly unshakable boundaries between civilizations began to blur under the pressure of geopolitical interests and personal ambitions. The world was ready for such defectors who could offer valuable knowledge in exchange for power and security, regardless of ideological barriers. Bonneval's indomitable temper and his contempt for all authority were not merely abstract character traits. They manifested in a series of scandalous incidents that, like steps, led him to his inevitable downfall in Europe. Even during his service in the French army, at the very beginning of the 18th century, his talent on the battlefield was undeniable, but his methods and behavior often overstepped boundaries. There is a known instance during one of the campaigns of the War of the Spanish Succession when Bonneval, commanding a small detachment, received orders to hold a position at all costs. Instead, seeing an opportunity for a daring attack, he unilaterally abandoned his defensive lines, launched a devastating assault on the enemy's flank, and secured a victory that seemed impossible. His actions brought success, but also the wrath of the command. He escaped serious punishment only thanks to the intercession of influential patrons and the obvious effectiveness of his unorthodox approach. This episode, however, cemented his reputation as a genius who recognized no rules, foreshadowing future, far more serious conflicts. Gradually, with his transfer to the service of the Habsburgs and under the wing of Prince Eugene of Savoy, this internal insubordination only intensified. Bonneval, convinced of his own superiority, began to perceive orders even from the greatest commander as a personal insult or a sign of short-sightedness. The culmination came in 1727 during the Austro-Turkish War, when Bonneval, commanding a large detachment, was ordered to conduct a complex maneuver requiring strict coordination with other units. He, however, disregarding the detailed plan developed by Prince Eugene himself, decided to act on his own initiative. His decision, though leading to local success, jeopardized the entire operation and caused chaos among the Allies. This was not merely disobedience, but an open challenge to authority that Prince Eugene, known for his discipline and demanding nature, could not forgive. The incident led to a series of accusations. Besides flagrant insubordination, Bonneval was also charged with more serious offenses, abuse of power, using his position for personal enrichment, and even embezzlement of state funds. The investigation, personally initiated by Prince Eugene, uncovered facts that seemed to confirm the worst fears: misappropriation of funds allocated for the maintenance of his units, dubious financial transactions related to the supply of provisions and equipment. Was this the result of deliberate corruption, or simply a consequence of his habit of operating outside the rules, using any available resources to achieve his goals without regard for formalities? Perhaps both. But for a European court where reputation and adherence to protocol were paramount, this was a conviction. A trial was inevitable, and its outcome was predetermined. Bonneval, realizing that not just dismissal but disgrace and possibly imprisonment awaited him, made a decision that definitively severed all ties with his past. He fled. His escape to the Ottoman Empire was not merely an act of desperation, but the last, grandest heist of his European career, a demonstration of his ability to survive by changing not only allegiance, but also identity, just to remain master of his own destiny. Upon arriving on Ottoman soil, Claude-Alexandre de Bonneval, now Ahmed Pasha, faced a task no less daunting than fleeing Europe: how to transform his disgraceful exile into a triumph. He wasn't merely seeking refuge, he sought a new stage for his indomitable talent. His first step was the masterful application of the very personal toolkit that had so often led him to conflict, but which now had to become the key to power in a culture utterly foreign to him. Bonneval, possessing an innate gift for persuasion and formidable charisma, skillfully leveraged his European reputation as a powerful influence. He did not try to hide his scandalous past. On the contrary, he presented it as undeniable proof of his exceptionalism and uniqueness. "I am the one feared in Europe," he seemed to silently declare, "and now my unrivaled knowledge and experience will serve you, augmenting your glory." Sultan Mahmud Thurmrunj and his viziers, though aware of his audacious antics and trials, saw in him not just a disgraced defector, but an invaluable, unique resource. Bonneval shrewdly grasped the Ottoman Empire's desperate need for modernization, having faced obvious military stagnation and falling behind European powers. He didn't just offer his services, he offered a clear and effective solution to their main existential problem: the restoration of lost military superiority and border defense. This was not a play on the momentary personal greed of individual officials, but on the deep fundamental ambitions of an entire empire, on its desire to reclaim its status as a dominant force in the region. His strategy of influence was multifaceted and calculated. First and foremost, he did not attempt to overhaul the entire cumbersome Ottoman army at once, understanding that such large-scale changes would inevitably face resistance. Instead, he focused on one critical area: artillery, or the Humberiche. This allowed him to demonstrate quick, tangible, and most importantly, impressive results. He didn't just issue directives from an office, he personally, with incredible energy, participated in every aspect of the process, from building new foundries to training soldiers, creating an impression of deep involvement, expertise, and personal example. He carefully selected for his team not only European renegades seeking fortune, but, equally importantly, talented, ambitious Ottoman officers who were open to new ideas and saw in him not just a teacher, but a chance for their own rapid career advancement. This created a powerful core of loyal supporters within his unit, the Humberiche, devoted not so much to the Sultan as to their charismatic new commander, who provided them with unprecedented opportunities for development. Bonneval was a true master of creating buzz and public demonstrations. He arranged spectacular firing displays of new, modernized mortars, captivating the Ottoman court with their destructive power and accuracy. He conducted dynamic exercises that looked impressive against the backdrop of traditional Ottoman training, demonstrating the speed, coordination, and effectiveness of European tactics. Every successful test, every step in the reform process, was presented by him as a grand achievement, irrefutably confirming his genius, and most importantly, the absolute necessity of his presence in the empire. He staged genuine miracles of European military thought, transforming routine technical improvements into thrilling, almost theatrical events designed to convince the high command of the correctness of their bold choice and investment in his projects. But perhaps the most astonishing aspect of his phenomenal success in a completely new environment was his personal, almost supernatural ability to adapt. A man who could not submit even to Europe's greatest commander, Prince Eugene of Savoy, now with astonishing flexibility learned the intricacies of the Ottoman court and its complex rules. He, a descendant of European counts, unhesitatingly embraced Islam, changed his name, mastered the Turkish language, and, most importantly, learned to understand and masterfully navigate the complex system of court intrigues and factions. He did not merely imitate, he deeply immersed himself in the new culture while retaining his inner, indomitable core and unwavering self-confidence. His cynicism, which in Europe had been the cause of his rapid downfall, here in the Ottoman Empire transformed into a powerful tool for survival and advancement. He showed no visible moral qualms about changing faith, principles, or allegiance. For him, these were merely instruments to achieve a single goal: power and absolute security. Claude-Alexandre de Bonneval, or Ahmed Pasha, proved that his genius for survival knew no bounds, and his ability to change his skin, adapting to any situation, was as refined as his outstanding military skills. He was the perfect chameleon, capable of not just surviving but thriving in any environment where he was allowed to be the complete master of his own destiny. This capacity for adaptation, for survival in any environment, was forged in the crucible of the most intense conflicts, the most significant of which was the confrontation with his former patron, the legendary Prince Eugene of Savoy. This figure, one of the most influential and respected in 18th-century Europe, became not merely an opponent, but the chief antagonist in the European chapter of Bonneval's life. Prince Eugene, an Austrian field marshal, embodied discipline, strategic genius, and unwavering loyalty to the Habsburg monarchy. He was a man who built empires, not one who destroyed them from within. His reputation was built on impeccable service, meticulous planning, and demanding standards for himself and his subordinates. It was this man, capable of discerning exceptional talent even in the most insubordinate officer, who once extended a helping hand to Claude-Alexandre de Bonneval, taking him into the service of the Holy Roman Empire. Initially, it was an alliance of two military geniuses. Prince Eugene, himself a brilliant tactician, valued Bonneval's courage and unconventional thinking. He granted him unprecedented freedom of action, allowing him to unleash his abilities on the battlefields, where Bonneval achieved one victory after another, augmenting the glory of the Habsburgs and his patron. But this freedom, this carte blanche, only strengthened Bonneval's conviction that rules were made for mediocrities, and a genius was allowed more. Prince Eugene, in turn, was a man who tolerated no deviation from orders or unauthorized actions, even if they led to success. For him, the military machine was a complex, unified organism where every cog had to operate in strict accordance with the overall design. He could forgive a mistake, but never conscious insubordination that undermined the foundations of military hierarchy. The conflict had been brewing for years, like an inevitable storm. Bonneval, intoxicated by his own successes and convinced of his infallibility, increasingly disregarded orders, deeming them outdated or restrictive to his genius. He became unbearable to deal with. His sharp tongue and arrogance alienated even those who admired his military prowess. The point of no return came with the aforementioned incident in 1727, when Bonneval demonstrably ignored Prince Eugene's detailed instructions during a critically important operation. This was not just a breach of regulations, it was an open challenge to the authority of a man who was not only his commander, but also his savior and patron. For Prince Eugene, this was the last straw. He could not allow a single officer, however brilliant, to jeopardize an entire military campaign and undermine the discipline of the army he had built for decades. Prince Eugene, a man of principle and order, did not act hastily. He initiated a thorough investigation, which uncovered not only flagrant insubordination, but also deeper issues, abuse of power and financial irregularities. For Eugene, this was not merely punishment for a specific transgression, but an attempt to curb an uncontrollable force that threatened the stability of his army. He understood that Bonneval, for all his genius, was too dangerous, too unpredictable, to remain within the ranks of a regular European army. The trial, initiated by Prince Eugene himself, became not merely a legal act, but a public execution, intended to restore order and discipline. It was a clash of two worlds, the world of absolute order and the world of chaotic genius. And in this confrontation, the European system, personified by Prince Eugene, could not afford to lose. It was this conflict, the culmination of Bonneval's European career, that forced him to seek salvation outside the familiar world, transforming him from a European count into a Turkish pasha.